I recently showed you guys how I start a food forest garden, and today I'm going to show you how I start a garden using chickens. Let's go. The initial setup for a no-till or back-to-eating garden is where the majority of work's going to be. Like I've said before, it can be tedious if you want to lay out the newspaper or lay out all the cardboard, but every single year it gets easier and easier. You don't have to do it all yourself though. You can work with nature in harmony to achieve your goals. If you have chickens, you know how hard they work, especially if you start to limit their supplemental feed. That really encourages them to go out and forage even more, and they'll dig ferociously. They'll scratch, they'll dig, and that could be a real problem if you don't utilize it correctly. When looking at something like a chicken, from a permaculture standpoint, what we like to do is first make a list or a diagram with all the attributes, like this one here in the Permaculture Designer's Manual. After all these attributes are listed, we then can see how to use everything that comes along with the chicken to our advantage. In the manual, Bill says that a deficit in inputs creates work, while a deficit in outputs creates pollution. A simple way to understand this would be, if you have a chicken and your system isn't providing the forage or the bugs for the chickens, then you yourself, you're gonna have to provide that food for them. So you're gonna have to provide the input. And if your chickens, if you're not doing something with their manure, if you're just letting it sit, if you're not using if you're not taking it and composting it or using it in a deep bed system, then that manure over time is going to actually work against the chickens. It'll become a pollutant to them and even their health and to your whole system. That's important to know because it helps us realize in order to reduce the amount of work and the amount of pollutants in our system, everything in regards to the chickens, all those attributes, they have to be utilized within the system. The same principle goes for our food forest garden and getting it started. In this scenario here, I've got grass, and what I want to do is, since it's fall, I want to cover this with mulch and make sure that the grass doesn't come through. But if I just cover it with mulch, if I don't use cardboard paper, if I don't use contractor's paper, if I don't use really, really thick mulch, it's going to come back through. But is there something that we could use in this system that can do this work for us without doing the contractor paper, make it easier on us? Of course there is, and that's where the chickens come in. We can use those to our advantage, but we must design the system in order for it to work like that. That's the main focus of the word permaculture, design. We know that one of the chickens' main behaviors and characteristics is that they love to scratch. They're just relentless and ferocious when they do it. I've said it before, when they've snuck into the food forest, just 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever, they can do a lot of damage. Mixing up the wood chips with the dirt, which is a no-no, something I really don't want, and tearing at the roots of the annuals. So that's a perfect example of the chickens, just their characteristics working against me and against the system. That's not what I want though. I gotta switch that up. I can use that advantage of the chickens, that characteristic, I can use that for my benefit. So I'm gonna show you how I do that. The way we're gonna do that is first, we're gonna pick where we wanna expand or start our garden. Site selection is important. I'm not gonna get into that too much today. That's not my focus, but it's good to spend your time finding a location on where you want to start or expand your garden to. Then, what we're going to do is set up a temporary pen for the chickens. This is going to keep them in the location that we want. And for me, I'm just going to start with a small pen. I don't have a lot of chickens. I only have 5 of them. And there's a few things you want to keep in mind when setting up this temporary pen. 2 really important things, and those are basically the ratio of chickens per area. How many chickens you have for the location, dependent upon the size, and how long you leave them there. So what your goal is going to be is to eliminate most of the grasses through the chickens while also fertilizing the ground. I'm showing you more for demonstration purposes, but this is just how I would do it if I was going to be expanding in this area with the food forest. So I'm just getting this temporary small pen set up. I'll have them in here and I'll monitor them day to day. That's really important. So you want to make sure you're leaving them on the area long enough that they get rid of a lot of the weeds and stuff, but not too long. And this is multifunctional. What's going to be happening here is you're going to have to reduce the amount of feed that you're going to have to give them because they're going to be eating these grasses, eating these bugs and everything. They're going to be cleaning the ground out for you, doing a lot of the work. They're also going to be defecating in here, and all those droppings that'll just fertilize the ground and actually really activate the soil. And previously I mentioned how you don't want to just put manure down. You'd want to put wood chips down before the manure. But in a case like this, the amount of manure for the area or space, it's going to be so low. I think it's going to actually benefit rather than hurt anything. And that's all, again, it comes back to balance, making sure you have the right balance of whatever materials you're using. Now that I've got the temporary pen all set up, I'm going to call the chickens in here. I'm going to help bring them in here with a little wild bird seed. It's a lot easier to just, I do that call, I've done it since I was young, since they were babies. I've done that call to them and it's kind of imprinted on them, I think. So now when I come out, I can just do that call with a little bit of feed. They always come running to me. And every time I feed them, I always do that call in the beginning. So, that's kind of just letting them know that I've got food for them and that it's safe to come get some. So I'm gonna keep them penned in here, get the rest of them in here, and then let them go to work. My chickens are pretty well fed, so some of them are just relaxing, taking dust baths right now, while some of the other are working. But you can see they're all focused in this one location over here. Haven't started expanding much, just eating some of the grass. I want them to move over a little, so I'm just gonna throw some seed down where I want to encourage them. So maybe do some scratching, start working at it, looking for the seed, scratching through. Once they get past some of the grass, they'll start working on more that they go scratching through. They've only been in there for a few minutes. How long to leave the chickens in the pen so that they eliminate most of the grasses and the weeds? It's going to be circumstantial, really, so that's going to have to be your call. But you'll notice as I start to rip up some of the grass that there's some weeds and some clumping grasses that get exposed that they'll probably not just get out. So you'll want to come through after a few days, if that's how long you're going to need to have them in there, and just dig those out yourself and remove them, especially if they're going to be an invasive weed. After you feel like the chickens have done a sufficient job of ripping up the grasses and the weeds, I'm in a different section here that the chickens have previously come through and ripped everything up basically. But here you can see we've got some invasive weeds and some clumping grass and stuff that I need to take out. The chickens just didn't get rid of themselves, especially something like this. This is a wild violet. This is actually invasive and I want to get all the roots out. I don't want to have to deal with that further in the future. After you finish getting all the weeds out, what you do next is going to depend on what time of year it is. I suggest doing this in the fall. So the grasses are all out. I'll have these weeds out. Then I'll come through, I'll wood chip this. If it's an annual garden, about 4 to 6 inches of wood chips, but I suggest about 6. And what we've done is we've avoided where we had to put down the contractor's paper or the cardboard or anything. And we also fed the chickens, and we also got that fertilizer from the chickens from their droppings. So that was really beneficial to what we did. And we can just keep moving the system on and on, down and down. And if it's spring, you can do what Jeff Lawton does when he starts his food forest. He comes through, puts his perennials in, puts his fruit trees in and stuff, and then mulches them. And if you want to plant annuals, I suggest just planting those annuals directly in the soil like you would here. And then as they come up, once they get taller, come through and put mulch around them. If you're going to use wood chips, again, about 4 to 6 inches of mulch around the young plants, and then about 5 to 6 inches around the young fruit trees. Now, we've taken what could have been a problem regarding the chicken scratching and turned that into an asset. There's a saying in permaculture, and it goes that the problem is the solution. Jeff Lawton has his own little quote, and I think it sums this up as well. He says, you don't have a slug problem, you've got a duck deficiency. So it's really just a change in mindset, and that's why I always say observation is so important. And now that the chickens have moved on, will they ever come back to that area? You don't want them coming back anytime soon, or the things that you've just planted, or that area where you put the wood chips down, they're going to come and scratch that all up, and you really don't want that. So in the perfect scenario, maybe 7 years down the road, if you planted a food forest, the descendants of those chickens, or if those chickens are still alive, can come and live in that food forest when everything's full grown and it's all woody, and their scratching really won't affect any of the roots or anything. Joel Salatin, who's a role model of mine and a great example of how to work with nature, I went to his property a few years ago and visited it down in Virginia. I was amazed by it, how low infrastructure everything was, and his design. It was just really incredible. One of the main things he did was how he combined the chickens with the cows, and this is what the basis of his setup was. He had electric fencing paddocks all set up, and that's where he had his cows. Pretty good sized area with a good amount of cows, and he would leave those cows in that paddock or that area for, I'm not sure, a decent amount of time, just dependent upon the circumstances. And the reason he kept them in the paddock was this was mimicking nature, how cows and all bovine are all mobbed together. And what this did was it made it so his cows ate all the grass and all the weeds in that section instead of just going throughout his whole property and eating all the sweet grass, as he calls it first. That's one of the things it did. It also condensed all that manure in one area. Then, after the cows are there for a certain amount of time without doing too much damage to the landscape, he would move them to the next paddock. After they were moved to the next paddock, the ground would sit for a few days, and this is where the magic kind of happened. The ground would sit for a few days, and there would be some bugs and stuff forming within the droppings from the cows. Then, at the right timing, Joel had it all timed out perfectly from doing it through the years. He would move the chickens onto that paddock, and the chickens would come through and eat the bugs out of the droppings, scratch through, spread all the manure all around. So they would be getting food, they'd be doing the work for him of spreading the manure, and he'd really be a multifunctional system in so many ways. So he actually got multiple yields on one piece of ground because he had chickens and cows moving through there at different times of the year. As a result of this setup, there was no bad smell, and it was just such a perfect design and such an inspiration. And Joel says that the way he really learned to do this was just seeing in nature how birds always follow all the bovine. He learned how they mobbed, he learned how they graze and everything, and how birds was a huge intricate part of following always behind them. Even if you don't have chickens, I hope that you still got something out of this video. That wasn't the main point of this video. The point was to encourage you guys to seek out, to look for, and to create connections within the system that can not only reduce the amount of work you have to do, but just benefit the whole entire system together, reduce the amount of pollutants, and create an overall system gain. Are there connections that you may be missing? Are there pieces that you can put together that'll help you out, that'll help your garden, that'll reduce the amount of work? Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, share it with your friends, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. See you in the next one.